That soggy piece of cotton you're holding right now, the one you think is going to save your life because the hero in every apocalypse movie wears something just like it, yeah, that's going to kill you. Not dramatically, not quickly, but slowly and miserably through hypothermia while you're still trying to figure out why you're shaking uncontrollably even though it's only 50 degrees outside. I learned this the hard way on a winter backpacking trip in the Smokies when I was 23 and thought I knew everything. Wore my favorite cotton hoodie because it felt comfortable and looked the part. 3 hours into wet snow, I was hypothermic enough that my buddy had to physically strip me down and force me into a spare synthetic layer. My core temp had dropped to the point where I couldn't make decisions anymore. That cotton hoodie nearly put me in a body bag, and I was only 8 miles from a parking lot. Here's what nobody tells you about survival gear. Hollywood has been lying to your face for decades, and those lies are so deeply embedded in our collective consciousness that when the power actually goes out, when the supply chains actually fail, when you actually need to keep yourself alive for more than 48 hours, you're going to reach for all the wrong things, and you're going to pay for it. Listen, I'm not here to sell you some fantasy where you're going to be the lone wolf survivor who outsmarts everyone with your tactical backpack and your movie knowledge. I'm here to expose the 10 most dangerous gear myths that films have burned into your brain. And then we're going to test every single one of them so you can see the failures in real time. Because the difference between what works on screen and what works when your hands are numb and your stomach is empty isn't just academic. It's the difference between making it and becoming a cautionary tale that nobody's around to tell. Let's start with the fabric on your back, because that's where most people die without ever realizing they made a fatal choice in their closet. Films have romanticized cotton for decades. Every rugged survivor, every post-apocalyptic wanderer, every tough-as-nails protagonist is wearing it. Denim jeans, cotton t-shirts, canvas jackets. It looks good, it feels familiar, and it's killing people in the backcountry every single year. Pause for a second and actually check your own closet right now. How many of your outdoor clothes are cotton? I'm betting most of them. Here's why that's a problem. Cotton is a sponge that hates you. The moment it gets wet, whether from rain, snow, sweat, or just high humidity, it stops insulating entirely. Not partially, entirely. And then it does something even worse. It pulls heat away from your body through evaporative cooling at a rate that will drop your core temperature faster than you can process what's happening. We're talking about a material that holds up to 27 times its weight in water and takes forever to dry because the fiber structure locks moisture in like a prison. We tested this with 3 people wearing identical weight shirts, one pure cotton, one polyester, one merino wool. Sprayed them all down with the same amount of water using measured spray bottles, then put them in front of a box fan in 50-degree conditions for 10 minutes. The cotton guy was shivering uncontrollably at minute 6, teeth chattering like a jackhammer, goosebumps rippling across his arms in visible waves. You could see the moisture beading on the fabric surface while the inner layer stayed saturated against his skin. Skin temperature on the torso dropped by 11 degrees Fahrenheit. The polyester guy was uncomfortable, you could see him grimacing and shifting, but his core temp only dropped 4 degrees and stabilized. The merino wool guy barely noticed, reported feeling damp but warm, and his skin temp dropped just 2 degrees. Same weight, same water, completely different outcomes because of fiber physics. The cotton held onto every drop of moisture like it was being paid to, and that water became a heat-stealing layer that turned fabric into a biological liability. The synthetics wicked moisture away from the skin through capillary action and dried in about half the time. The merino regulated temperature and stayed warm even when damp because the fiber structure traps insulating air pockets differently, and the lanolin coating provides some water resistance. But here's what the screen never shows you. You don't get to stay dry. You're going to sweat during exertion. You're going to get caught in weather you didn't predict. You're going to have to ford streams or crawl through wet vegetation. And when you do, that cotton will go from feeling like safety to feeling like a cold, wet blanket strapped to your body, sucking the life out of you degree by degree. The fix isn't complicated, but it requires you to abandon everything you think looks tough and practical. Build a base layer system that wicks moisture away from your skin fast. Synthetic or merino, never cotton. Add an insulating mid-layer that maintains loft when wet, like fleece or synthetic fill. Top it with an outer shell that blocks wind and rain while allowing some vapor transmission so you're not cooking in your own sweat. And absolutely carry a spare dry base layer in a waterproof stuff sack, because clothing systems fail when you push them hard. And when they do, a dry layer against your skin is the difference between recovering your core temperature and spiraling into dangerous territory. Fabric alone doesn't save you. The layering system does. Speed of drying does. Your ability to manage moisture actively does. Cotton kills in cold, wet conditions. That's not opinion, that's thermodynamics. But if you think cotton's betrayal is bad, wait till you see what happens when your miracle stove dies at the exact moment you need hot water most. On screen, characters have endless canisters of butane, firing up portable stoves in the middle of nowhere like they're ordering delivery. They never show the canisters sputtering uselessly in freezing temps, or the fact that fuel weight adds up fast, or that relying on a single heat source is the kind of rookie mistake that leaves you eating cold beans in the dark, wondering where you went wrong. We set up 3 different stove systems side by side in field conditions: a standard isobutane canister stove, a simple alcohol stove made from soda cans, and a wood fire built from a paint can with ventilation holes. Same amount of water to boil, half a liter, same environmental conditions at 40 degrees with 10-mile-per-hour wind, and we timed everything while measuring fuel consumption and total pack weight for a 3-day trip. The canister stove was fastest when it worked, hitting a rolling boil in 3 minutes and 40 seconds. Compact, convenient, easy to use. But drop the ambient temperature below 32 degrees and watch the magic disappear. The fuel pressure inside the canister tanks because the propane-butane blend doesn't vaporize efficiently in cold temps. The flame sputters and weakens, boil time doubles or triples, and if you didn't bring an insulated canister sleeve or know the trick of warming the canister against your torso inside your jacket, you're basically carrying dead weight. We simulated this by refrigerating a canister overnight and trying to use it. Boil time jumped to 9 minutes and the flame was so weak that it barely qualified as heat. The alcohol stove was slower under optimal conditions, took 6 minutes and 30 seconds to boil the same volume, but it was absolutely bulletproof reliable. No moving parts to break, no pressure dependencies, no temperature sensitivity. The flame burned steady in wind once we added a simple aluminum foil windscreen. Denatured alcohol doesn't care if it's freezing or sweltering. The wood gasifier required about 5 minutes of prep time gathering dry twigs and getting the airflow pattern established, but once lit, it boiled water in 4 minutes flat, and your fuel source is literally everywhere around you: sticks, bark, pine cones, dry grass. Here's the brutal truth about heat. Betting everything on a single method is a critical vulnerability that compounds every other problem you'll face. Think in terms of fuel diversity and method redundancy. Canister for speed and convenience when conditions are good and weight isn't critical. Alcohol for reliability when conditions are terrible and you need guaranteed heat no matter what. Wood gas for long-term sustainability when carrying fuel isn't an option and you're stationary enough to gather combustibles. And actually practice with all 3 systems before your life depends on them, because trying to figure out how to prime an alcohol stove while your fingers are numb and you haven't eaten hot food in 12 hours is how you end up giving up and eating cold rations until you lose the psychological will to function. A single stove fails when the fuel system collapses. 3 methods with overlapping capabilities keeps you warm and fed when everything else is breaking down. Speaking of systems that fail when you need them most, let's talk about the 3rd myth that's going to hit hardest because we're all addicted to our electronic devices: the fantasy that power banks and solar panels will keep you running forever. Hollywood makes it look effortless. Just grab a portable charger and a fold-out solar panel and you're good indefinitely. Charge your phone, run your GPS, operate a radio, light up the night. Wrong on every level. Power banks lie about their capacity through creative marketing math. Solar panels fail in anything less than ideal conditions, and cold weather turns your carefully hoarded battery reserves into disappointing paperweights that deliver half their rated output. We tested this by measuring actual watt-hours versus the marketing claims printed on power banks, then ran controlled discharge tests at different temperatures while monitoring real-world phone charge cycles. A 10,000 milliamp hour power bank that boldly claims it can fully charge your phone 3 or 4 times? In practice, accounting for voltage conversion losses from the battery's 3.7 volts to USB's 5 volts, that's more like 2 complete charges on a brand new phone, with a degraded battery making it even worse. At room temperature, that power bank delivered about 6,000 milliamp hours of usable power to the device. At 5 degrees Celsius, simulated by placing it in a cooler with ice packs, that same power bank delivered 30% less capacity. Only 4,000 milliamp hours made it to the phone. 30% gone just from temperature. That's the difference between keeping your emergency radio running through the night or sitting in silent darkness. We also tested charge retention over time. A fully charged power bank left in a pack for 3 months lost 18% of its charge just sitting there doing nothing. And here's what nobody tells you. Even premium brands like Anker, RAVPower, or Goal Zero show similar self-discharge patterns of 10 to 20% over months. These aren't durable long-term solutions. They're convenience tools with built-in expiration dates. Pause the video after this section and actually check your power bank. When did you last charge it? Test it. You'll be surprised how much capacity you've already lost. Solar panels are even more deceptive. The cheap ones people impulse buy because the price seems reasonable need direct sunlight at the right angle, perfectly clean surfaces, and absolutely zero shade. Put them under trees, under clouds, or just point them 15 degrees off optimal, and you get a pathetic trickle charge that won't even keep up with your phone's background power drain. We tested a budget 50-watt panel against a premium 100-watt panel in overcast conditions. The budget panel produced 4 watts. 4! The premium panel managed 22 watts, but cost 4 times as much and weighed twice as much in your pack. Both were useless under tree cover where most camping actually happens. Solar is an intermittent source that depends on weather and daylight, while batteries degrade over charge cycles and time regardless of how careful you are. Building a reliable power strategy around batteries and panels alone is a losing bet. Carry a small manual crank charger as an absolute last resort backup that requires nothing but your own calories and mechanical energy. Most importantly, prioritize low-power communication methods and accept that electronic navigation and artificial light have a hard expiration date that arrives much faster than you want to believe. Power independence is an illusion. Power discipline and graceful degradation to non-electronic methods is the only reliable strategy. Now we get to the part that films completely skip because it's not cinematically appealing and doesn't make for dramatic trailer footage. Hygiene, human waste management, and disease prevention through basic sanitation. This is about internal threats you create through your own neglect. On screen, you see the firefights and the scavenging runs and the dramatic water shortages, but never the brutal consequences of what happens when 20 people are living in close quarters without running water and proper sanitation infrastructure. They don't show you the diarrhea that dehydrates you faster than you can replace fluids. They don't show you the infections from untreated cuts that turn into cellulitis and blood poisoning. They don't show you the skin conditions that develop from not being able to bathe properly for weeks. That most disaster deaths, historically, come from disease, not violence or starvation. Look at the 2010 Haiti earthquake. The earthquake killed an estimated 230,000 people. But in the year following, a cholera outbreak killed another 10,000 and infected hundreds of thousands more. Why? Because sanitation infrastructure collapsed. Human waste contaminated water sources. The disease didn't come from the earthquake itself, it came from the breakdown of hygiene systems that people took for granted. That's what ends you in sustained disasters, the invisible creep of infection, not the dramatic instant threats. Here's what we're actually talking about when nobody's filming. Human waste needs to go somewhere specific, and if you don't manage it with knowledge and discipline, you're creating disease vectors that will take down your entire group through fecal-oral contamination. Imagine your survival group has 20 people.
No toilets, no running water. What's your actual plan? A basic field latrine isn't rocket science, but it requires understanding principles most people have never thought about. Cat hole minimum 6 to 8 inches deep in organic soil, minimum 200 feet from any water source, and covered properly with soil immediately after use. Sounds simple until you realize most people have never dug a proper cat hole in their lives and don't understand why depth matters. Shallow holes allow animals to dig up waste and spread pathogens, or why distance from water is non-negotiable. If human waste contaminates your water source, you're looking at cholera, dysentery, hepatitis A, and typhoid, diseases that cause agonizing decline through dehydration and organ failure. We did a practical contamination test using concentrated blue food dye as a visual surrogate for pathogens, because actually using fecal bacteria would be insane and dangerous. Hand washing with bar soap and clean water versus hand sanitizer application. The soap and water combination removed over 95% of the dye after a vigorous 20-second wash, visible under UV light that makes organic residue glow. The hand sanitizer, about 70% removal, and it didn't touch any physical dirt or organic matter embedded in skin creases. Build a dedicated hygiene kit stored in a waterproof pouch. Bar soap, because it lasts exponentially longer than liquid and doesn't leak. Concentrated bleach tablets for surface disinfection of shared items. A solid plan for menstrual supplies that doesn't rely on a single product type because supply chains fail and redundancy in methods matters. Internal threats from poor hygiene cause infections, and infections cause cascading medical emergencies that spiral into death when antibiotics aren't available. A cut on your hand that gets dirty from poor hygiene and isn't properly cleaned can lead to cellulitis within days, sepsis within a week, and a fatal outcome within 2 weeks in a world without medical intervention. Hygiene discipline isn't optional or paranoid. It's survival delivered through preventing microbial infection instead of treating it.
Let's shift gears to vehicles, because Hollywood has spent billions of dollars convincing audiences that cars are these magical escape machines that run forever on vapor fumes and start perfectly every time no matter how long they've sat. Films turn vehicles into cheetahs of escape, heroes roaring down empty highways while outpacing the disaster in their rearview mirror. The mechanical truth is uglier. Your car is a maintenance-intensive machine that requires fuel, functional batteries, properly inflated tires, and a dozen interconnected systems that can each fail independently and catastrophically. We went through a basic vehicle preparedness checklist that reveals failures most people never think about until they're stranded. Battery terminals corroded green from years of neglect, creating electrical resistance that prevents starting. Spare tire that hasn't been checked in 5 years, completely flat or dry rotted to the point of uselessness. Fuel stabilizer myths, where people think adding a bottle of Stable will make gasoline last indefinitely, when the chemical reality is that untreated gas degrades in 3 to 6 months. And even with stabilizers, you're looking at maybe 12 to 18 months before it becomes unreliable and gums up your fuel system. Diesel stores longer chemically, but it grows algae and bacteria in the tank if water contamination occurs, which happens naturally through condensation. We demonstrated common failure points by checking 3 emergency-ready vehicles that owners swore were good to go. One was a popular Honda CR-V with a battery known for failing in cold weather. We measured 10.2 volts instead of the required 12.6, far too weak to turn over the starter motor under load. One had a spare tire at 14 psi when it needed 35. Sidewalls cracked from UV exposure. One had fuel that had been sitting for 8 months and smelled varnishy when we opened the tank, a clear sign of oxidation and volatile compound evaporation. None of these vehicles would have successfully evacuated anyone under time pressure. The practical problem is that most people can't perform basic field repairs because they've never learned. They don't know how to identify and swap a blown fuse using the diagram on the fuse box cover. They can't patch a tire with a plug kit. They can't troubleshoot why an engine won't turn over by checking battery voltage, listening for starter solenoid click, or confirming fuel pump prime sound. And that means when the vehicle inevitably fails, and it will fail because all machines fail, they're immediately stuck and dependent on rescue that might not come. What would you actually do right now if your car died 50 miles from home with no cell service? Think about that. The strategic approach is maintaining your vehicle obsessively while infrastructure still exists. Fresh oil, charged battery, good tires, stabilized fuel rotated every few months. Learn quick field repairs that don't require specialized tools. Fuse replacement, tire plugging, jump starting, basic troubleshooting sequences. And most critically, plan your evacuation routes assuming you won't have the vehicle at all. Walk your routes on foot. Know where water sources are when you're moving at 3 miles per hour instead of 60. Understand how long it actually takes to cover distance with a loaded pack on your back. The vehicle is a tool that extends capability when it's working, not a guaranteed escape pod. If your entire survival strategy depends on your car functioning perfectly under stress, you've already failed before the crisis starts. Food preservation is the 6th dangerous myth, and this one's particularly insidious because films make stockpiling look effortless and eternal. Just grab cases of canned goods, stack them in a basement corner, and you're set for years of post-apocalyptic dining. Except, canned goods rust and seals fail. Rodents chew through cardboard and thin metal. Temperature swings cause expansion and contraction that compromise integrity. And if you don't rotate your stock using first-in, first-out discipline, you end up with a pile of potential botulism that looks perfectly fine from the outside, but will end you from the inside. If your basement flooded or power failed for a week, how many of your canned goods would actually still be safe? Most people have never checked. The approach that actually scales beyond a year or two is learning preservation methods that don't rely on industrial canning infrastructure: dehydration, smoking, salt curing, and fermentation. Dehydration removes the free water that bacteria and mold need to grow, cutting weight by 70 to 90% depending on the food and making it shelf-stable for months or years in proper storage. We dehydrated sliced vegetables in a basic electric dehydrator, then in the sun using racks covered with cheesecloth to keep insects off. Both methods worked. The electric was faster and more consistent. The sun-dried took 3 times as long but required 0 electricity. Smoking adds preservative compounds like formaldehyde and phenols while creating a surface environment hostile to microbial growth through desiccation and pH changes. We cold-smoked meat over green wood for 12 hours, creating a protective bark that extended shelf life to weeks, even without refrigeration. Salt curing works through osmotic pressure, pulling water out of cells, bacterial and food cells alike, until bacteria can't survive. We cured pork belly with a salt-sugar rub, and after 7 days, it had lost 40% of its weight in water and was shelf-stable. Fermentation, which sounds complicated but is really just controlled bacterial cultivation, turns vegetables into long-lasting, nutrient-dense food through lactofermentation that produces lactic acid, dropping pH to levels that pathogenic bacteria can't tolerate. We packed shredded cabbage into a jar with saltwater brine, and after 2 weeks of room temperature fermentation, we had sauerkraut that was still safe and edible 3 months later. The skill-based preservation approach defeats the stockpile-based approach because skills don't rust, they don't expire, and they scale infinitely with available resources. When supply chains collapse, your refrigerator becomes a useless insulated box within 72 hours once the power grid fails. But if you know how to dehydrate food in sunlight, smoke meat over fire, salt cure with salt, and ferment vegetables in a jar, you can extend calories indefinitely using techniques that predate civilization. Stockpiles run dry. Knowledge sustains you. We saw this play out in the roleplay when the person who consistently made fair deals, even when they could have extracted more, ended up with the most trading partners and the best access to diverse resources. Start building small reciprocal networks before crisis hits. Actually know your neighbors. Establish patterns of mutual aid and small exchanges that build trust over time. Learn basic negotiation frameworks that prioritize long-term relationships over extracting maximum value from every interaction. And understand deeply that keeping a low profile about what you have is often strategically smarter than broadcasting your supplies. The biggest asset you can develop is social capital, built on reliability and trustworthiness, not the hoard of gear you've stashed in your basement. Bartering is fundamentally about reputation networks, and reputation is built slowly through consistent, trustworthy behavior over dozens of small interactions. Insects, parasites, and small animal threats are the 8th myth, and this category gets completely ignored by Hollywood because it's not visually dramatic or exciting.
These are external environmental invaders that attack regardless of your precautions. We're talking about Lyme disease from ticks causing joint damage and neurological symptoms, malaria from mosquitoes causing cyclical fevers and organ failure, typhus from lice causing high fever and vascular collapse. These aren't abstract risks. These are diseases that flourish when sanitation breaks down and people are living outdoors in close quarters with limited hygiene resources. We demonstrated practical defenses starting with proper tick removal technique using fine-tip tweezers, grasping the tick as close to skin as possible and pulling straight out with steady pressure, never twisting or squeezing the body, which can inject more pathogens. Not the folk remedies people learn from relatives like touching it with a hot match or coating it in petroleum jelly, which actually increase disease transmission risk by causing the tick to regurgitate into the wound. We treated clothing with permethrin by soaking garments in a diluted solution according to manufacturer safety guidelines, then air drying. When properly applied, permethrin-treated clothing repels mosquitoes, ticks, and other insects for multiple weeks, even through several washings. It's synthetic pyrethrin, which affects insect nervous systems, but has low mammalian toxicity when used as directed. We set up a mosquito net using just paracord strung between trees, demonstrating the proper tension and entry seal technique. Then added the trick most people don't know. A small battery-powered fan placed inside the net creates airflow that mosquitoes can't navigate through, cutting bite incidents to nearly zero because their weak flying ability can't overcome even gentle air currents. Treat your clothing with permethrin before the crisis hits, giving it time to dry properly. Inspect your entire body daily for ticks, paying special attention to warm, moist areas where they prefer to attach. Never skip the mosquito net just because it seems like overkill for one night, because it only takes one infected mosquito to transmit malaria or dengue. Environmental invaders are genuinely dangerous precisely because they're persistent enough to ignore until symptoms appear days or weeks later when treatment becomes difficult or impossible. Ignoring disease vectors because they're not as dramatic as starvation or violence will compromise your health through infections that disable you gradually through fever, pain, and systemic inflammation. The external biological threats often determine long-term survival more than the dramatic dangers you prepare for. Technology dependence is the ninth myth, and it's where modern reliance becomes a critical vulnerability point that most people don't recognize until their phone dies at the worst possible moment. Apps that claim to work offline but require periodic internet connectivity to validate licenses or download updates. Cloud backups that assume you'll always have data connectivity. And the widespread belief that offline maps will save you when GPS becomes unreliable. We staged the realistic phone failure scenario. GPS drift under heavy tree canopy where satellite signals bounce and scatter, giving position errors of 50 to 200 feet. App crashes during critical use because the software wasn't designed for sustained offline operation. Offline map tiles that didn't download properly at the right zoom levels because you assumed your internet connection would work when you needed it, not realizing the specific map sections you'd need weren't cached locally. Then we ran a navigation speed comparison using only a phone versus a paper topographic map for wayfinding through an unmarked area. The phone user was faster in perfect conditions with clear GPS lock and full battery, covering the route in 22 minutes. But when we simulated realistic failures, reduced the battery to 10%, moved into heavy canopy that degraded GPS accuracy, and introduced time pressure, the phone user became disoriented and took 45 minutes, making multiple wrong turns because the GPS track was unreliable and they'd never developed map reading skills. The paper map user was slower initially at 28 minutes, but maintained consistent performance regardless of conditions, because paper doesn't require batteries, satellites, or electronic systems. The map user understood terrain association, could identify features visually and match them to contour lines, and wasn't dependent on a device telling them their exact position every second. We brought in a basic compass solely as a bearing reference tool, using it to maintain directional awareness between terrain features. But this wasn't a deep orienteering lesson requiring extensive compass technique. The fundamental point is that your phone is a cheat code for a game you must know how to play without artificial assistance. Offline maps fail because you didn't download the right data at the right resolution, because the app updated and corrupted local files, because storage filled up with photos and there's no room for map tiles, because 1,000 small technical failures compound into one catastrophic navigation failure when you're trying to move through unfamiliar terrain in deteriorating weather with limited daylight. Always carry paper notes with key waypoints and coordinates written in permanent marker on waterproof paper. Laminate your actual maps or store them in waterproof cases. Mark them up with real routes you've walked, water sources you've verified, and rally points you've confirmed. Understand that technology is a luxury layer on top of fundamental navigation skills, and when that layer inevitably fails, being capable using methods that have worked for centuries before satellites and smartphones becomes critical. Your phone is a phenomenal tool that multiplies capability, but learn to win the game without it because batteries die, electronics break, and GPS fails when you're surrounded by terrain or weather that blocks signals. Now here's the 10th myth that Hollywood consistently gets wrong, and it's one of the most dangerous because water is life, and getting this wrong ends you faster than almost anything else. Water purification. On screen, heroes drink straight from streams with maybe a quick wipe of the mouth, or use a single filter device that magically makes everything safe forever. Natural water sources are contaminated with Giardia lamblia, Cryptosporidium, bacteria like E. coli and Campylobacter, and sometimes chemical pollutants that no filter can remove. One bad water source can give you explosive diarrhea that dehydrates you faster than you can replace fluids, creating a death spiral where you need more water, but drinking more contaminated water makes you sicker. We tested 3 purification methods side by side, using water deliberately contaminated with dirt and bacteria from a livestock area, something you might encounter near farms or in backcountry where animals defecate in streams. Method 1, rolling boil for 1 full minute, which kills all bacteria, viruses, and parasites through heat denaturation of proteins. Method 2, chemical purification using iodine tablets, which takes 30 minutes in warm water but kills most pathogens through oxidation. Method 3, a pump filter with a 0.2 micron pore size, which physically removes bacteria and parasites but doesn't kill viruses and doesn't remove dissolved chemicals. The boiled water was completely safe, but required fuel, time, and a container that could withstand heat. We measured the fuel cost, about 4 grams of alcohol fuel to boil half a liter, which adds up fast over weeks. The iodine-treated water was safe from biological threats, but tasted terrible, and the iodine itself is mildly toxic in large sustained doses, not recommended for pregnant women or people with thyroid conditions.
The filtered water removed sediment and clarity improved dramatically. Bacteria counts dropped to safe levels, but viruses smaller than 0.2 microns passed through, and chemical contamination wasn't addressed at all. Each method has trade-offs. Boiling is the most reliable but resource-intensive. Chemical treatment works but has taste and health considerations. Filtration is fast but incomplete. Have multiple purification methods and understand when to use each. We put all 10 of these corrected myths together in a 12-hour field test with 3 people, lightweight packs, and the revised gear list. Proper moisture-wicking fabrics with spare dry layers, multi-fuel cooking capability spanning canister, alcohol, wood, hygiene kit with soap and bleach tabs, power management plan that assumed battery failure, dehydrated food we'd preserved ourselves, permethrin-treated clothing with insect defenses, paper maps and compass, and a water purification system using all 3 methods. We didn't bring enough electrolyte replacement and felt the sluggishness that comes from losing salts through sweat. One person's boots weren't properly broken in and developed blisters by hour 8, significantly slowing their pace. These weren't catastrophic failures, but they were real, measurable problems that surfaced in a controlled 12-hour test with emergency egress available. Imagine those failures compounding over days or weeks with no bailout option. That's where training matters. That's where practice reveals the brutal gap between theoretical knowledge and operational reality. The field test proved that everything we debunked was actually critical, and everything we learned through testing mattered more than any movie-inspired gear list.